Well, the president said that while it was a 50-50 chance, that he did expect and was hopeful that this would be a deal that he could reach with the European Union. And also, as you said, the president of the European Commission, which is really basically the leader of the European Union.
Yeah, there's a 50-50 chance that this is going to happen. That is a better percentage chance than he often gives any kind of negotiations when he's going in. So was this expected?
That she also came in saying, look, we're the world's two biggest economies when you take the block of European countries and the United States. So we really need to work something out. And the president.
What if I told you that the EU's 100 billion euro plan could raise your grocery bill, sink Detroit, and shake Silicon Valley to its core? This isn't just a trade war. It's a calculated move to hit America where it hurts most. And the stakes have never been higher. Imagine a giant political chessboard, and rather than moving a pawn or even a rook, Brussels has just dragged its queen across the board, staring Washington square in the face. That's exactly what's happening with this 100 billion euro plan. In case you missed it, the EU isn't just folding its arms on the sidelines while the US imposes a proposed 30% tariff. No, Europe came to play. This isn't a random, pieced-together retaliation. It's a well-calibrated punch straight into the gut of critical American industries.
I think what's also interesting here is that the president at one point was complaining about cars and saying that there weren't enough American cars being sold in the European Union. They're now agreeing, according to what their announcement is, 15% automobile tariff. They're saying that he feels like he has a deal now that feels good for America. And she's also saying that she feels like she has a deal that's good in terms of rebalancing trade. She sort of noted that there was this trade surplus when it came to the European Union and that there was a trade deficit when it came to the United States. Ran through so many of the other things, but it seems like the European Union is going to be making some big investments in the United States. And overall, if we even back up and look at the big picture here, President Trump was under pressure to make trade deals.
Think of it as their version of a no-deal contingency package, but instead of preparing for a bad storm, they've created the storm. The details of this retaliation aren't just impressive in scale, they're laser-focused. Aviation, cars, and digital services aren't just any sectors, they're practically the holy trinity of the US economy. These industries pump money, create jobs, and keep the engine of the American economy humming. So why go after them? Simple. If Brussels wanted the US to feel it, they couldn't stop at slapping tariffs on things like, I don't know, peanut butter or Florida oranges. That's small potatoes compared to what Europe's cooking up. Let's break it down further. That 100 billion euro retaliation plan involves a staggeringly specific 66 billion euros in industrial tariffs. Think about it. Europe is essentially saying, okay, you want to mess with Boeing? Fine, we'll hit right back. For example, they're slapping a hefty 25% tariff on airframes. AR frames. You know, the literal skeleton of an airplane. And let's face it, if anyone knows how to hurt Boeing, it's Airbus. American aviation doesn't operate in a vacuum. It relies heavily on European suppliers and manufacturers for everything from engines to specialty parts. By placing tariffs on these components, Brussels is trying to make Boeing's already expensive planes even costlier to produce. Airbus, meanwhile, gets to grab its popcorn and watch this drama unfold, completely unscathed. That's the part that stings the most if you're an American aviation executive. Europe isn't just retaliating, it's clearing the runway for its own gains. Now, here's where the numbers speak volumes. In the US, aviation isn't just about planes in the air, it's about people on the ground. The industry employs hundreds of thousands of workers directly and indirectly. If supply chains start to tighten because of tariffs, or worse, grind to a halt, those jobs aren't safe. Estimates suggest as many as 200,000 of them could be at risk because of this tariff chess game, and good luck convincing voters in those affected areas to keep calm while their livelihoods hang by a thread. That's the kind of economic ripple effect nobody in Washington wants to explain at the next town hall. But this isn't just a story of Airbus as the good guy and Boeing as the victim. The EU's move here feels cold, calculated, and unapologetic. It's as if they're saying, look, There are rules to this trade game, and if you're gonna break them, we'll break some stuff too, like your economy. Think about it. They're ready to disrupt the foundational industries that help power America as a global leader, all while repositioning themselves as an economic heavyweight. And then there's the bigger question hanging over it all. Why now? Why is the EU pushing back so aggressively right at this moment? One theory: leverage. The US's tariffs were set to put the screws on European aviation, but it's also no secret they squeezed Brussels where it counts. Pride. Europe didn't take kindly to what they've described as bullying tactics from Washington. This 100 billion euro blitz isn't just retaliation. It's also a clear message. Europe isn't about to play second fiddle to the US on the world stage. If Boeing loses out and Airbus emerges stronger, well, that's just collateral damage in Europe's larger playbook. And the stakes aren't just economic, they're political too. Washington knows damn well that jobs tied to aviation are spread across numerous states, many of which lean heavily on manufacturing to fuel their economies. Losing those jobs? That's not just bad for businesses, it's bad for politicians on the ballot. It's the kind of issue that flips districts and gets headlines like "Tariffs leave Americans out of work." In other words, there's more on the line here than imported airplane parts. So, here we are. The EU has executed its first move in this multi-billion-dollar chess match, and it could ultimately leave the American aviation industry grounded. If Boeing stumbles, the shockwaves are bound to hit everything from Wall Street to small-town turbine manufacturers. It's not just about planes anymore. It's about showing where power truly lies. But don't think the EU is stopping there. They've saved a hefty slice of this 100 billion euro blitz for Detroit. With their crosshairs locked firmly on autos next, the battle is only heating up. The real question now is whether American automakers are ready to dodge the incoming freight train, or if they're bracing for a head-on collision. What happens when European automakers like Volkswagen and BMW suddenly find themselves outpacing Ford and GM? Not because they're making better cars, but because the EU just rewrote the rulebook? Well, we're about to find out. The EU has thrown 28 billion euros into tariffs targeting vehicles and components that are practically icons of the American auto industry. SUVs, pickup chassis, electric powertrains. These aren't just random picks off an assembly line. They're the bread and butter of Detroit manufacturing. It's a direct hit on the types of vehicles Americans not only build, but heavily rely on for the European market. The question no one wants to answer yet. Can Detroit handle it? Here's the punchline, if you can call it that. The EU isn't just putting up barriers with these traditional tariffs. They've added a cherry on top with the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, an eco-friendly sounding policy that might as well translate to more pain for fossil fuel-intensive exports. Starting in 2026, this mechanism won't just penalize American vehicles for being shipped in from overseas. It's also going to add costs for how these vehicles are made, especially when the EU decides they come with too big a carbon footprint. Suddenly, American cars being sold in Europe start to look a lot less attractive. And if that's not enough, the CBAM is also targeting vehicles routed through Mexico, but labeled as US made. It's not just a competitive jab, it's a straight-up border wall for inefficient automakers. Let's be real. This move isn't about offering Europeans cheaper Ford Broncos or electrified F-150s. It's about pricing them out entirely. Under the EU plan, vehicles like SUVs or Ohio-made electric powertrains will face hefty tariffs, sometimes as high as 30% once they hit the European market. Picture walking into a dealership in France or Italy and seeing an American car that costs thousands more than its German or Italian alternative. Even a die-hard Mustang fan would have to think twice before opening their wallet. And as European automakers like Volkswagen and BMW pocket green subsidies from their governments, they'll be grinning all the way to the bank while America's auto industry faces rising costs and sinking sales. Now, imagine the same ripple effects back at home. Assembly lines in Detroit or Kentucky slowing to a crawl. Workers wondering if their number's next on the layoff list, and factories shifting to part-time operations. It's like watching a slow-motion car crash. American car makers built their reputations on muscle cars, hardy pickups, and innovation in the electric vehicle market. But those reputations don't carry much weight if Europe has decided it would rather utilize its own backyard for manufacturing. Moving production to Europe isn't an option for most US brands either. It's a logistical and financial nightmare, especially with the added weight of tariffs on essential components like transmission systems. And it might not just end with Detroit watching its dominance fade. If these tariffs push long enough and hard enough, political consequences could be waiting just down the road. Imagine the economic backlash spreading through the Midwest, where manufacturers serve as lifelines for local economies. These aren't just jobs, they're communities tied to an industry that has long been a cornerstone of American pride. A worker in Michigan doesn't see a pickup truck as just 4 wheels and a chassis. It's a mortgage payment, weekly groceries, maybe even their retirement. And when those jobs disappear, the ripple effects won't just be unemployment numbers rising. It'll be a political reckoning, the kind where candidates come knocking and promises of getting tough on trade become the next big campaign slogans. And it's not just workers who'll be feeling jittery. Investors are already reacting. Recently, share prices for European brands like Volkswagen and BMW have ticked upward, while American giants like GM and Ford have watched theirs slide. That's the market essentially betting on Europe crushing it over the next decade, while Detroit gets weighed down. Let's not forget the annual US-EU auto trade is valued at a whopping 70 billion euros. A trade flow of that size doesn't just get adjusted without seismic consequences, and the quake is already being measured in Wall Street portfolios. Still, there's a brilliant clarity to the EU's strategy. They're not just slamming tariffs on the competition, they're reshaping the marketplace entirely, forcing automakers to adapt or get edged out. Carbon credits and environmental standards aren't just policy details here, they're the future. And while the EU has given its homegrown automakers a roadmap to thrive in this new market, US companies are left scrambling for ways to navigate it. The CBAM will effectively make low-carbon production a must, incentivizing automakers to pivot to sustainable practices, or risk losing market share entirely. Meanwhile, the assembly lines in Wolfsburg or Munich aren't slowing down. In fact, they're speeding up, churning out EVs that Europeans will buy, because thanks to EU subsidies, they'll be cheaper. Add high tariffs to the mix, and American automakers just can't compete. In short, Europe isn't just taxing American cars, it's steering the future of the industry. Detroit risks becoming a relic if it can't keep up. At the same time, Europe's automotive power play is more than just a trade war maneuver. It's an effort to cement its green agenda and crown its own manufacturers as global leaders. For now, Detroit sputters while Volkswagen, BMW, and other European brands shift into high gear. Of course, the EU isn't stopping here. Tariffs on planes and cars take a toll, but Europe has a third target that hits closer to home for many of us: Silicon Valley. If you thought Detroit and Boeing had it bad, just wait until big tech finds out what Europe has in store next. Silicon Valley might be the land of innovation, where every app or gadget seems to redefine how we live. But Europe's new digital taxes, they could turn it into a financial headache big enough to make even the tech giants pause. A 6% tax on Google's advertising revenue here, a 7% tax on Netflix subscriptions there, sounds small. But when you're raking in billions, those small numbers add up fast. And make no mistake, this isn't some general tax for all digital companies. These targets have names: Google, Netflix, Apple. It's like Europe is saying, you've reigned over our markets long enough, now pay up. The EU plan isn't just about clawing back revenue, it's a power play. These companies generate close to $100 billion a year in Europe, but thanks to strategic tax setups, they don't contribute nearly as much as EU lawmakers think they should. So, in their eyes, this isn't an attack, it's balance. Google's ads, which practically print money, will now cough up an extra 6% tax off their revenue. Apple's cushy App Store commissions? Another 5% straight to Brussels. And for Netflix, whose subscribers binge watch their shows across Europe, every subscription comes with a 7% surcharge that heads straight into EU coffers. Individually, the taxes seem like gnats buzzing around a giant. But collectively, well, that's starting to look like a swarm. But this isn't just about the billions per year landscape of revenue streams. There's a deeper question lurking here. Is the EU trying to break the dominance of Silicon Valley? Google, Apple, and the rest don't just dominate market share, they all but define the digital economy. In Europe, their tech products aren't just utilities, they're part of everyday life. If you're uploading pictures to the cloud, ordering groceries using an app, or streaming a movie, odds are an American company runs the backend. In Europe, they're sick of it. Imagine Netflix subscribers in Paris, Berlin, or Rome. All of a sudden, affordable becomes premium because that 7% tax trickles down into subscription fees. How long are people willing to keep paying more before they cancel? Or take Apple. Developers who create apps for the App Store already sacrifice a chunk of their revenue to the infamous 30% cut Apple demands. Add an extra 5% EU tax into the mix, and you have app developers stuck between a rock, a hard place, and Brussels. Either they eat those taxes themselves or pass it on to consumers, who are unlikely to be thrilled about yet another price hike. Laws of economics aside, nobody likes getting squeezed from all directions. And it doesn't stop there. In a way, the digital services game is also a data game, and Europe has thrown another curveball: data localization requirements. Google, Amazon, and Apple don't just hold your photos and playlists, they hold mountains of data on millions of Europeans. Now, thanks to the EU's new push for digital sovereignty, all that information needs to be stored on servers inside Europe. This, for tech companies, is the equivalent of being told to rebuild their digital infrastructure from scratch within the EU borders. It's not something that gets done overnight or cheaply. Analysts say billions in new infrastructure costs loom for companies like Google Cloud or Apple iCloud. And no matter how wealthy these tech giants are, even their executives probably flinch when they hear the word billions. Of course, Silicon Valley isn't just going to take this lying down. You can already hear the sound of lobbying efforts revving into high gear, with digital giants arguing that such taxes are discriminatory or that they harm innovation. But in Europe's eyes, they're simply leveling the playing field. And there's also the unspoken truth that these taxes are shaping up to be politically unassailable in Europe. Why? Because they tap into public frustration about how much power and profit big tech continues to hold. Ordinary Europeans might not care about Google Cloud's bottom line, but tell them that this move is part of a bigger fight for digital fairness, and you've got yourself a winning argument. The financial consequences are starting to ripple out even before these proposals fully take hold. Alphabet and Apple recently saw stock market reactions wipe out roughly $5 to $6 billion in value at the mere hint of upcoming digital taxes. For Netflix, the excitement over European growth potential has fizzled into a more sobering reality as they've downgraded upcoming subscription projections. If investors smell trouble, you can bet there's fire below all that smoke. The EU's €100 billion retaliation doesn't just hit the US economy, it shakes its core. With a 0.35% direct impact on GDP and ripple effects reaching 0.6%, Washington faces a storm far bigger than tariffs alone. And it's not just numbers. The package could shift the eurodollar parity to 1.17, weakening the dollar and nudging inflation targets off course. This is more than trade, it's leverage. The question is, will the US raise its stakes or fold under pressure? Meanwhile, how much more can everyday Americans afford in this international chess match? Power isn't just shifting, it's being redefined right now.